Hi, and welcome to Homo Ludens, the podcast on history and board games. And I say podcast with a funny voice because actually, Homo Ludens is a YouTube channel, a very famous YouTube channel, you could say, about history and board games. No, not really. But we also have a podcast. Most of the podcast lately has been dedicated to the amazing series by Stuart and Pierre called We Intend to Move on Your Works about the American Civil War. But originally, the podcast was about doing collective reviews for the Club de Jeu, and we're back to do reviews for the Club de Jeu. And the reason there was such a big hiatus is that we changed radically the way the Club de Jeu works. And for those who don't know, the Club de Jeu is a way in which the community of Homo Ludens backers on Discord are learning, playing, and thinking about games together. And originally, we were picking one game a month. We were playing this game, and then we would review it. It was a bit of a mess. We had voting procedures. There was a lot of debates. There was a lot of disappointment during those votes and during those nominations, and people were not really happy. And the thing that happened is that Luis, who was the original founder of Le Club de Jeu on the Moludens Discord server, was a bit annoyed and didn't really have time to take care of it, and he left it to you, Pierre,
He
to
did,
actually,
yeah.
to take over and maybe change a bit the system to renew the energy. And you came with a new approach. And maybe Pierre, you can start by explaining how Le Club de Jeu on the Homolidens Discord server works now in a few words.
So the idea now is that it's led by the members of the Discord server, sort of the individuals on the Discord server, and people are free to come and tell me, who is sort of like runs as an admin on the server, who runs all the sort of back end side of it, which game they want to play for a month. They'll tell me how they're going to organize it, and then they're going to already from that point. It's meant to work like this, hasn't in practice, but book a podcast in the future so that we know that they're going to play for maybe 1, 2, or 3 months. Then everyone else can say whether they want to sort of chip in and play with them or not. They're free to skip it. And that's how it works. The key change is that we have several games going on at once. So Successors is just one of quite a few games we have going on at the moment on Le Club de Jeu, and there's a pretty broad sort of variety of games that we have at the moment.
Yeah.
It's pretty good. It's pretty nice to see. And it's a lot of games that people would never have played before, and they just want to jump into and try for a session or two.
Yeah, it has been very exciting, and I think the energy is really there. So that was definitely nice to see that change and the effect that it had on the community. And Successors is this first collective review, but actually more content is going to come afterwards because other games are coming to an end. I think we have Brotherhood and Unity who's coming to an end also of their Club de Jeu process. So pretty excited about this. And there should be an episodic type of content for Empire of the Sun where you have two teams playing against each other, a team for the Allies, a team for the Japanese. So actually it's also interesting to see how content might evolve going forward. But anyway, we're here today to talk about Successors. Successors 4th edition, specifically the one by Phalanx, even though we'll talk about previous editions too, because I think it's important to contextualize the game. And here to discuss Successors, this very famous 4-player CDG, we have Philippe. Thanks for being here, Philippe. We have Pierre, and we have Stuart. So thanks
you'd be
to
rid
the
of
three
me,
of you
but you're
for
never rid of me.
Yeah, Pierre and Stuart are always here. Yes, but I'm happy to have Philippe with me. So at least, yeah, maybe not. Maybe he's gonna be also awful with me. So who knows about that? No, but it's great to have the 4 of you to do this collective review. And as usual, when we start those reviews on this podcast, we start with a bit of historical context to better understand what the game is talking about and what historically it is trying to represent. So Pierre, I will leave it to you to give us a bit of context on what is happening in Successors.
Sure. So I mean, a bit of context for why I know a bit about this is my undergrad at school was ancient and medieval history, and I was actually learning. I had my module on the Wars of the Diadochi, which is what sort of Successors covers, at the same time as a module on the War of the Roses. And Oh boy, that was so confusing. There's so many names in my head floating around during that time, and I am so happy to be rid of that because this period is super confusing. The sort of individual actions of each of the generals who are sort of mentioned and present in the game are not that confusing. It makes sense. It's just there's so much of it, so I'm not going to sort of delve into the details of what happens. I'm going to give you broad strokes of sort of the flow of how the war went. Basically, Alexander the Great died in 323 BC after having conquered, or basically inherited, Macedon, Greece, conquered Asia Minor, sort of modern day Syria, that sort of area, Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Persia, a huge swathe of land that was under this new Macedonian administration. When he died, this land was sort of still nominally Alexander's empire, but shattered amongst the different satraps. So these sort of administrative divisions called satrapies. Think of them, if you know, sort of more medieval history, more like duchies or counties, but a lot more sort of geographically based. They're not split over a large swathe of land. There is these satrapies that are ruled by these specific Macedonian generals, all the Macedonian generals who came with Alexander the Great on his conquests. The wars of the Diadochi are the wars over which of these generals would conquer or would control this empire that Alexander left behind. Alexander didn't really have any clear heirs. He had his half-brother, Aridaeus, who was, some sources say he had some sort of mental health problems. Some others say that he's just an idiot, basically unfit to rule. He never held command. He never had any sort of civic role either before Alexander's death. And the other heir was Alexander's as yet unborn child, Alexander, at the time of his death, who was a baby. He was unborn, and he was a baby for most of this time. So the generals of Alexander, Perdiccas being the first one, who was by Alexander when he died in Babylonia, claimed regency of the empire. And this sort of kicks off the first war. These wars of the Diadochi are split up into traditionally 4 wars. Some people say 5, and some people say 5, 6, 7, 8. You know, there are more wars that carry on until arguably the Romans conquer them. Essentially, Perdiccas, one of Alexander's generals, was with Alexander when he dies. Alexander gives Perdiccas his signet ring, giving him nominal sort of a significant amount of control in the empire. And Perdiccas decides to rule this empire as regent, consolidating all the power within himself. A rebellion kicks out pretty soon after. Usually, people say that Antipater, who was another sort of maybe the most important administrator in the empire before Alexander's death, and Ptolemy were the 2 big players in this rebellion. All of these names I'm going to sort of just drop them in. I'm not going to do much detail because there are so many of them. But Ptolemy joins this rebellion, and war breaks out in Asia Minor and Egypt mainly. So from Babylonia, where Perdiccas was stationed initially, he breaks out. These people are just coming in down on him, attacking from all fronts. Perdiccas wins quite a few big battles, but was murdered by one of his own generals called Seleucus. After his death, Antipater was made regent of the empire. He took the ring from Perdiccas, and all the other satraps retained their satrapies. Ptolemy kept Egypt, Seleucus was granted Babylon, and Antigonus, another one of the major players, was granted Asia Minor, one of the biggest areas in the empire. This sort of had a status quo for maybe 1 or 2 years with no war, but then the second war kicks off with the death of Antipater. He wanted to not pass the regency to his own son. He gave it to another general who was unrelated to him, called Polyperchon. Antipater's son Cassander, you might have heard of him, he's one of these big names in this period, decides to raise in rebellion against Polyperchon, who decided again to be a sole regent. And with him and Antigonus, Cassander sort of started this campaign all over this huge sort of increasingly shattered empire. Eumenes was a big ally of Polyperchon and was defeated by Antigonus, which gave Antigonus this sort of undisputed control of Asia Minor. Cassander got Greece, Macedon, and another general called Lysimachus was given Thrace, parts of Asia Minor, and Ptolemy still held Egypt. His territory came into sort of Babylon and Syria as well, quite a bit. Again, bit longer of a peace, maybe 4 or 5 years, and in 312, the Third War broke out. I think it's around this war where the son of Alexander, Alexander IV, was murdered, and Aridaeus was also killed at some point around this time as well, which is a bit of a shift in these sort of series of wars because the sort of there was no pretense of it being a regency anymore. It was, it was just these powerful generals fighting each other for total power. They weren't being the heirs of sort of the stewards of Alexander's empire. They were instead maybe arguably separate kingdoms. Lots of fighting goes on. The Fourth War was basically a continuation of this war until sort of 3 dynasties end up being in power: the Ptolemies in Egypt, the Seleucids in Persia, and the Antigonids in Greece and Macedonia. All of them eventually fell to the Romans or the Parthians, but sort of that's when sort of stability came to the area. Very confusing. I've missed out so many names there, so many characters, so many sort of backstabbing events, but it is these individual generals who work together in shifting alliances across, I'd say, about 20 years. And they were all Macedonian generals. They'd all worked together before during Alexander's conquests, and using Alexander's heirs as sort of legitimacy for their power. Feel like that was kind of all over the place and but that's what the war was like. So if anyone else has anything they want to jump in and expand on, go ahead.
But actually, I think it's a great background because I think it will connect a lot to a lot of the discussions that we're going to have about the game. And while we were talking about this, I could see Philip's eyes sparkle because I think it reminded him of some stuff that happened during actual games. So I think that's a pretty cool. I think it's a good. I really like the context. So thanks a lot, Pierre. I got confused by all the names at some point. Even I've played the game quite a bit, and I remember. Yeah, it's just the explanation of what actually happened historically is very confusing, and I wouldn't be able to make the difference between the last game I played of Successors and what actually happened historically. It's too chaotic for me.
Too chaotic.
But yeah, just for the context of the game itself. So the game was originally released in 1997 by Avalon Hill. I think those were the first 2 editions. Then there was a 3rd edition that was published by GMT. And finally, there was an edition that was published by Phalanx a few years back. I would say that most of the people play either edition 3 or edition 4. Edition 1 and 2 are really from the late 90s. So I'm not sure how much they are played anymore. Personally, I only played edition 4, but we have Philippe with us who actually played both version 3 and version 4. So I thought it could be interesting before we start talking about the game, specifically about version 4, maybe to talk about how the game evolved, at least in its last couple of iterations. So Philippe, I was wondering, can you maybe give us some highlights or understanding of how the game evolved between the GMT edition and the Phalanx edition?
Maybe if I go back to the first and the second edition. So as you mentioned, the first edition was published in 1997, and I believe the second edition wasn't actually published professionally. I think it was a fan-made rewrite of the rules and basically an evolution of the system, which was then professionally edited and printed by GMT in 2008. So the third edition of the game is actually so I heard, because I never played neither the first or the second, but the third edition is basically the second fan-made edition transposed into a proper printed game. The fourth edition that came out, I believe 3 years ago, edited by Phalanx, I would say created some small evolutions over the third edition, but retains much of the gameplay. Quite a significant number of cards. A few have changed, but I wouldn't say the majority of the cards have changed. What the fourth edition brought is obviously much better components. I mean, we're talking about almost 15 years difference between the third and the fourth edition. The fourth edition also comes with minis, as most people would have noticed. And the fourth edition also includes, either as core rules or as optional rules, many of the, again, fan-made house rules that were developed by people that play the game a lot. And some of them were actually published, I believe, in C3I or some other wargaming publications. And the Phalanx edition took all those optional rules, integrated a few into the core rules, and presented also many of those as optional rules. As to how the gameplay of the fourth edition was impacted by these changes, I would say the gameplay stays pretty much the same. There is a little bit more chrome. The generals have more character in the fourth edition rules, because each general has a specific ability, which wasn't the case in the third edition. We are probably going to discuss that and its impact on the game later on. Some changes also for those who are familiar with the third edition rules. The garrison rules have been changed, and these change quite significantly the way you build up your armies. Very quickly, in the third edition rules, major cities, the game has minor cities and major cities. Major cities were required to be garrisoned if you didn't want your opponent to just walk and take control of the city. So therefore, the players tended to create combat units and put them in major cities just to garrison them, to avoid someone just taking over the city without having to lay a proper siege. In the fourth edition, it's not necessary to garrison the cities anymore, which means that players tend to create bigger stacks of combat units because they can, transfer all those units which were used for garrison duty previously onto the armies that are maneuvering in the game. In my perspective, this is the main change. The way you can recruit generals on top of the two generals that you start with also changed. But to some extent, I believe this doesn't have the same impact on the game as the change in the garrison
as the other
rules.
changes.
Yes.
Would you say it's like probably the ultimate edition, the fact that it regroups a lot of the material that was developed by the community in one single game? It has high quality components and quite a lot of changes, and we can go into details overall. But would you recommend, like, someone who wants to get into Successors, whether or not we like the game, and that's a discussion that's going to happen afterwards, but someone who's interested in Successors wants to get a box, should they go for the Phalanx edition or the GMT edition?
I mean, they're not the same price, because obviously the Phalanx edition comes with miniatures, so it's much more expensive. Some people will prefer some of the rules of the third edition. That may be something that we'll discuss later on. But beyond that, if you like miniatures, if you want top-notch components quality, I would suggest going for the fourth edition. If you don't care so much about the miniatures and you're just here to enjoy the gameplay and the game itself, I think you can find a pretty cheap copy of the third edition and you'll be fine. And you'll be fine.
I think also in the fourth edition there are counters as well. So if you do want to just not use the minis in the fourth edition as well, that's a great option too.
Yes.
Actually, I really like.
That's something that I would like to discuss. Yeah, that's something that I would like to discuss afterwards, also regarding the components and the push for minis. But it's a whole different topic.
Yes.
But yeah,
maybe just one last comment on the rules. The rules of the third edition are written in typical GMT style. The rules in the fourth edition of the game are, I would say, not laid out as what
I hate them.
What gamers usually expect. They're not bad. I mean, the information is there, but it's sometimes very difficult to find information, and therefore, if you are used to a GMT rulebook and you don't have anyone to teach you the game, you can go pretty safely on the third edition and use those rules.
That was something I was wondering about because I briefly looked at the rule book and I was like, "Oof, this looks unstructured." And I was very lucky that I learned the game through two things. First, I watched the Jean-Michel Grosjeau's video about Successors,
Yes.
which are amazingly well made. And I mean,
Yeah.
if you learn the game from Jean-Michel Grosjeau, you know the game really well. Like he's the best in the game for making those videos. So that's
You
the
don't
first
need
thing.
to open the rule
And
book.
the first time,
Yeah.
he's just excellent. And once you've watched this, I played with more experienced players for my first game, and they actually walked me through all the different things. So I never had to open the rule book to actually learn the game. So I played the game multiple times, and I never opened the rule book. So I don't have an opinion on the rule book. I just flicked through the pages, and I was like, I don't like it, but I didn't have to worry about it, which is maybe something to consider too. Yeah.
I did learn through Jean-Michel Grosjeau's videos,
Go ahead,
which is
Stuart.
great.
Yeah.
And then I the first game I played was with Philippe, who handled that. But then I taught the game twice at conventions in Ireland. I went to conventions to people who'd never played it before. So I did 2 games, 2 different sets of players. None of them had ever played it before. So I was the guy teaching the game. And then I had to use the rulebook because someone will ask you a question like in the moment, like how does this thing interact with this thing? And I'm like, okay, now I got to look it up. And when you have to reference the rules, it's horrible.
It sucks.
Like it's
yeah.
really frustrating, and it's because I'd only played like a game before. You know, if that issue hadn't come up before, if I didn't really remember it, it means I normally a rule book would be fine, but it was very. And there is an index, and the index still leads you to like weird places, and rules are split between different sections of the rule book. So it'll be like, oh, this rule isn't in this one section of it; it's in the other time we talk about, you know, enemies or whatever. And some terms aren't defined, or they're defined in weird places. Yeah, it's a very frustrating rulebook. I was not impressed at all with the rulebook, and I'm not impressed with some of the wording on some of the cards, which I think is vaguer than it needs to be. And like, I think there's some clarity issues with some of the text they've gone with in the 4th edition.
Yeah.
I can't compare that with 3rd edition because I haven't played it, but certainly,
it did stop
for a
us
game
couple
that's
of
on
times.
its 4th edition,
Yeah.
it's frustrating to see.
Yeah.
You still have these problems where you're like trying to interpret a card in a CDG in a 4th edition is like, what's going on here? This should be iron tight.
Yeah.
Like,
I could totally understand it for a 1st edition game because I mean, especially when it's that innovative, I think it makes total sense, and it's totally fair that you have some events that are unclear, maybe some wording in some events that might need clarification. But it's true that for a 4th edition that is released almost 30 years after the first one, you could expect, and it has been played a lot, like it has a massive community behind it, it could be a bit tighter. So that's actually quite interesting. Would you say, Philippe, that it had already some of those issues in the version 3, or that's really specific to version 4?
So I didn't encounter the same problem as Stuart did because I played the cards quite a few times. So I don't recall having that problem on the cards. I don't believe that the rules are bad. Like there's no really important information missing. I think it's just the layout. Maybe Phalanx wanted to introduce a layout that wasn't so wargamey. And therefore, the rules are structured completely differently from what we are used to reading. And I think, for me, it's harder to reference when I play. And I totally understand Stuart when he says that those rules are horrible. But I don't think they're. I think they're still quite watertight. Like you don't need to go to BGG to find the answer to a question. The problem is that you may need
everything is there.
minutes.
Yeah.
You may need like 30 seconds to a minute, which is annoying when you're playing the game.
I'm thinking of card wording and stuff like there's a card called Drink the Hemlock, which is a bonus event where the first part, where bonus events by default, you're like, okay, so you trigger the event and then you get the ops points always. And Drink the Hemlock is kill a royal heir, or maybe just a royal family member in one of your spaces and then do the event. And it's the kind of rule where you would really want it like in bold somewhere. You don't have to do the event. But instead, it's a bit uneven between the cards, where some cards will say, this is mandatory, you must do this, which means that only they are. And it's the kind of thing where I just wish it was spelled out a little bit more clearly. And if you're playing with someone who knows the game, they'll be like, no, you don't have to drink the hemlock. But like, because it's the kind of thing where like that kind of card is like, so I have the heir, do I have to kill him? Is that how this works?
Yeah, that
Why
was
is
your
this the game
situation. I
now?
remember, Stuart. You were,
And-
you were
yeah,
afraid
yeah,
you'd had to
yeah.
kill your own heir.
Yeah, because it's like he's the only one I've got. Sorry, buddy.
And it's funny that you would say that, Stuart, because I also had the card in a game that I was playing with Philippe at PunchCon, and like I literally played it, and I just asked, and I was like, well, I had no one to kill anyway, so I didn't really care, but I just was wondering for future reference. And it's true that there is this advantage for when you're playing with more experienced player, you don't really have to worry about those things. You just play, and then you ask along the way, which is also an advantage of the game, is that there are so many people who've played it for a long time that it's quite easy to find a group of experienced players you can play with and have fun, which is kind of okay. And I was wondering, so Pierre, we haven't heard from you. So what was your experience with the game overall? How many times did you play, and who did you play with, and did you struggle with the rules?
So yeah, I played twice. I played on TTS with Philippe teaching the game, and then I played at PunchCon with Philippe teaching the game.
I didn't teach the game the second time.
No, that's true. Yeah, we just dove in, but that was really useful. So it all went really smoothly and nicely for me, and I have no comments on the rulebook because I've never looked at it. It's
We had the same
watched,
experience.
yeah. I watched Jean-Michel Gauge's videos, and his play raids especially were really useful during the online TTS play. But once you've played it once, I find, especially if you're with other players who don't have that mental load of having to teach it, or anything like that, it does play really nice and smoothly. Obviously, when things are getting tense and sort of complicated stuff needs to happen, it can take sort of slow down. But I found that we were sort of at PunchCon, especially, we were getting through those turns pretty nice and quickly, and really, so it was really dynamic. A lot of things were changing turn to turn, and a lot of sort of alliances, or like which player you should be wary of, was changing quite quickly. At one point, I think I was really far behind when we were in our in-person game, like sort of to the point where in most of the games I'd just be like, what's the point, like what would I do? But I ended up coming, maybe, obviously there's only a winner and everyone else is a loser, but I was maybe sort of third-ish out of 4 or 5, second or third. I jumped back quite quickly and unexpectedly, and that was a really nice feeling that you can still be in the game. And I think, Fred, you played it last year, Vanguard, and at one point I came up to you, and I was like, how's it going? How's the game going? And you were saying, it's lost, there's nothing we could do, he's going to win next turn, and that's it. And then 2 hours later I came back, and the guy you said he was going to win was just crushed into dirt, and it was
he was dead in the water.
And it feels, I feel like that this game is perfect for that. It's a nice flow.
Going back to you, Philippe, maybe can you explain generally the gameplay? Because we've been talking about the different versions, we've been talking about the historical context and learning the game, but we didn't talk about what system it is. And I think it's quite important because it's 1997, it's the beginning of CDGs, but it's also a very unusual CDG. So maybe, Philippe, can you give us an overview of how Successors play and what makes it unique?
Yes, so it's very much an area control game. I think you can link it pretty strongly to We the People and Hannibal, Rome versus Carthage, in the sense that you are playing cards to activate generals, and you are moving those generals and encountering enemy generals that create battles. The map is point to point, and you can use your card to place political control markers, which eventually will define which regions you control and which victory points you score. If you have played one of those games, I think Caesar versus Gaul used the same system. Sword of Rome,
it does.
also is quite it's quite similar. So it's in that same genre. Same family of games. What is quite specific about Successors is first the dynamics of the game and how it evolves, but maybe we can discuss that later. The second thing is the victory conditions, because it's a game that you can win on victory points only, which you score by controlling regions. So basically by placing political control markers on the board. Or you can win it by having enough legitimacy points. And legitimacy points are, I think, a very nice injection of Chrome into the game, because it relates to which general had the most legitimacy among the Macedonian army after the death of Alexander. And you can win legitimacy or lose legitimacy in the game by getting control of Alexander's body, potentially bringing him from Babylon all the way to Macedonia in Pella to bury the body of Alexander. You can marry some royal family members. You can take control of heirs, which in the game can help you win, because you can become the regent. If you control the heir, you can pretend to be the regent of the empire. And those two different victory conditions can also work combined. If you control certain heirs, not every heir of Alexander, but you can combine your victory points that you gain from taking control of areas on the map and legitimacy points, and that can also give you the victory. And it creates a very interesting dynamics of usually in the first or two turns, people are a little bit wait and see, because they want to see what Perdiccas, which controls the body of Alexander in Babylon, wants to do. Does he want to rush to bury Alexander's body in Macedon? Or does he want to slow play and target different victory conditions? So that's usually the first or the second turn. And the third and the fourth turn, you start getting those heirs into play, which are very important, because whoever controls the heir get legitimacy, but also a shot at victory, combining both legitimacy and victory points. And the window in the game to win by this victory condition is just one turn. So if you don't win with that specific heir, you will have to kill the heir, and your opportunity to win using that heir is gone. So it's really creates a lot of very interesting shifting dynamics, and I think that's quite specific to Successors.
It turns it into quite a nice tight games in certain areas if you're going for that, which is quite cool, whilst also letting it be quite this sort of sprawling, open, do what you want game. Like, oh, okay, that failed, so I can go in any direction and try and conquer anything to try and sort of scrap these points together and win. You're right. Yeah, it's nice, because I never went for that. I never went for that at all. And that was a choice by me not to go for that. But I was seeing other players go for it. And the way that I'm interacting with those players and trying to stop them is totally different to how I'm going to try and stop another player. And that's really cool, I find. And it doesn't get in the way too much, rules-wise or playtime-wise, I find.
I really agree with this. I really feel like the Chrome serves a purpose. And I think often people are wondering what Chrome is used for and complain about it and everything. Like at the core, I don't have an issue with Chrome in games, especially in historical games. I think they are part of why we enjoy those games. And I think this is a perfect example of a lot of Chrome, all of it used for a lot of to great effect, and not in the sense that it's putting the game on rails. I think that each bit of Chrome opens possibilities in an unusual way, which I find super fun. And for me, it's a masterclass in how to use Chrome to its best effects. And I think we're talking about the victory conditions, and I think it's definitely one of the unique features. And they are not absurd. Like, all of them make sense. All of them have a time. All of them come at the right moment. And all of them, as you said, Philippe, create a dynamic that is making the game radically different. And Pierre, you were talking about the game that I was having at Vanguard, and you could feel that different point when you came to see what was happening, how the vibe around the table was radically different from one moment to another.
Absolutely.
So I think it's really cool. I was wondering, Stuart, what was your perception of Chrome in the game, and do you feel also the same way as we do regarding the fact that in this case Chrome is really to the service of the game and it's dynamic? And how did it go in your own experience?
I quite like Chrome, so I don't really have an issue with that. And I think it is well used for the most part. I don't really have any specific gripes on the Chrome. I think looking at some of the option rules, they might be more than the game needs. But I think the victory conditions in particular are really good and really interesting. And I would say that it's a game that really isn't at all on rails. And particularly compared to a lot of historical games, it feels very open, and a game that more like has phases. Like turn one is kind of a distinct feel of the game. and then turn 2 and 3 you have the cart, and then you have the heirs phases at the end. So you have it kind of ebbs and flows, and each part of the game feels differently, but it's never really telling you this is what you have to do and you have to follow this. And partly, I mean, you use the same deck the whole way, so it never structures that these events must trigger at these points. There's no early, late events. It's all going to be in play all the time, which I really like. And I like that. I like the style of CDG where you reshuffle the deck every turn, so you can't really, it's useful to know roughly what's in the deck, but you can't, like, it's not about memorizing the deck.
Yeah.
And knowing, you're not going to be like, oh, I know this card's going to come up, because you could, theoretically play a game of Successors with only one set of cards the entire way through. It would be statistically so unlikely, but it is theoretically possible that you could only see however many, that like 20 cards or whatever, 25 cards, which would be hilarious. But like, I like that element of it that makes it hard to predict, and it feels very open-ended. Yeah, I think the Chrome is good. I like the little details, particularly around like the different. I will say, okay, this might be time to talk about the general powers. Might be one of those like bridges too far.
Really, for you?
Like,
yeah.
Well, we just
I don't agree.
We never
actually
remembered them.
Yeah,
because I think once
they're
you
written
play,
on the card in front of you.
Yeah, that your army is on top of.
Yeah, you can figure it out.
I think it's the kind of thing that's fine as an optional rule. Like, I would like it, but I think expecting people to internalize the entirety of Successors and use those in their first game, because we would do it, and like I taught this game to different groups of people, and we would sit down and play it, and on like turn 3, someone would be like, "Oh fuck, I have a special power, don't I? What is it? Oh, it's not relevant right now." And then they would keep playing.
Totally
like,
about it.
I evade better, and I'm trying to siege, so it doesn't matter. And they would keep rolling it, and like the next turn they'd be like, "Motherfucker, I evade better." Oh, it just hasn't. Like, I haven't thought about that at all, because my loyal Macedonian's just sitting on top of that. And so I do feel like that kind of, those elements are like, they're not bad. It doesn't ruin the game, but it is more than it needs necessarily. It feels like it's a little bit more spice than it necessarily has to have. And if you ignore it, like we did, and like it wasn't in earlier editions, like, it's fine. It's a good game. There's asymmetry in the generals already, in their combat values and their initiatives, so they all feel a little bit different without needing these powers specifically to them. And they have the ones that have like extra loyalty or less loyalty or less prestige and those kind of things. So they all have their little wrinkles even before remember.
I think, like, talking about the asymmetry as well of the generals, there's the asymmetry in the starting positions as well, which is pretty much random, right, at setup, because you're not quite drafting generals, but you're just handing out a random pile of generals to each person, to pair of generals to each person, and they're always going to have a different setup, which is super interesting and such a wild choice, I find, for a historical war game, because you really rarely get that sort of totally randomized setup, which is essentially what it is, apart from, as mentioned before, like Perdiccas is the one you want to focus on. You want to see what he does, because he is the strongest general, and the one who's, that player who controls him is the one who's the most likely to win at the start. But then because he's most likely to win, he's who everyone is focusing on, and so everyone's going to be jumping on. But for it to still work with that wild, completely random setup, I think is really cool. Maybe going through reading through the notes of the historical background before I read it earlier, it really made me feel like, oh wow, yeah, like it felt really random during play, and I didn't really feel like I was sort of playing history, but you kind of were, because all these alliances were shifting. You did start on completely different sides.
It's interesting that you're saying this, because it reminds me of a conversation that we were having with Philippe at PunchCon about this, around the fact that the game has a random setup, and it doesn't give you a very directed version of history, but it gives you a system that represents the history of the time really well, and it can work with any faction, starting anywhere with any general. It just gives you a set of tools and say, this is your sandbox, and go have fun. And what ends up happening is something that, in terms of dynamic, is pretty close to what happened historically, even if it's not the actual historical events. And this was a discussion that we're having with Philippe, and I was curious for you to maybe expand on what you like about the game and why you like that aspect, and how it relates to the actual historical content, Philippe.
You said it all. I think it's really a props to the game to generate, as you say, it's not linear history. It doesn't follow exactly what happened, but really the game gives you a flavor of what were the wars of the
Diadochi, I don't know.
The Diadochi.
I had two different lecturers
in English
who pronounced it differently. So
yes.
Don't worry.
You really feel there, and I find it also because I played the game quite a few times, and I didn't know anything about the history before, because it's not really a part of history that you are being taught at school or even later in life. And when I read the history of what actually happened, I could really feel, I could really make a connection to the many games of Successors that I played. Also, what I find quite interesting in the history and in the game is the implementation of that idea of balance of power. And I think we're talking a period which is 325 or 323 BC when Alexander died, and it's pretty interesting to see how things developed so long ago. Like the minute you have in the real history and in the game, the minute you have one general or one faction that comes on top, that has significantly more victory point, you see alliances shifting. And it can happen like once or twice every turn. So potentially you can play a game of Successors and create informal alliances 5-10 times in a single game, and I find it and I find that extremely fun and quite accurate in terms of recreating history. And the second thing that I love, and which again mirrors history quite well, is the backstabbing. There is a very, very strong incentive for you to engage in some form of backstabbing at some point in the game. So it's not for everyone, this game, but I think the game does that very well. And again, Pierre gave us a very quick account of the history, but there was a lot of backstabbing in the actual history.
Regarding specifically the asymmetry and the special powers, Philippe, so Stuart was saying that it was probably a bridge too far for him. I was wondering, what was your impression? Is it too much? Should it have been part of the extra rules or not? What do you think?
I think my answer is in what I said. I think the chrome and the flavor of the game comes from those alliances and recreating that overall narrative of the wars. Therefore, the characters of the general, usually when I play, I don't play with those special abilities. It's not that they don't slow the game too much. It's more that you it's not the focus of the game, really. The focus on the game is on negotiation, alliances, grabbing that one extra victory point and backstabbing this guy here, and when am I going to do my push for victory, for example. That's the focus of the game. I don't care very much about whether the Perdiccas can do this, or Polypercon has that special power, or can evade on a 4 and this one on a 3.
It doesn't need it, but I think it's nice that it's there, because I don't know. I feel like every single convention I've been to that's like a wargaming convention has had multiple games of this, or at least one big game, or like PunchCon. I don't know, Fred. There were like, or Philippe, there were like 5 games of this being played over the weekend.
Something like this.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
I think that was the most played game.
Yeah,
that was the most played game at that convention.
I think
which I didn't realize.
At conventions that we go to, especially the big ones like PunchCon, you have a few games that are always played a lot, and you have Angola, you've got Successors, and you've got Here I Stand, and for nerds, you've got Virgin Queen, and that's basically the big like the convention games. And it's true that Successors is one of the most popular.
And I would say at PunchCon it was the most popular. Like Here I Stand, there were 3 games, I think. Successors having more than that really surprised me, and I think it speaks to maybe the sort of more competitiveness of it. Here I Stand is that sort of big event game that you get out every so often for a lot of people.
It also has a vibrant tournament scene, remember?
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's a tournament. Yeah, there is a tournament scene in Here I Stand, absolutely. But I can see Successors being, I don't know, maybe for me, more appealing of a tournament.
I think that it's 4 players and plays in like at least 3 hours less time.
Yeah, that's
a big part of Successors' appeal. Like it's 2 fewer players, and you can clock the game out if you know what you're doing 4 to 5 hours. Versus even if you know Here I Stand, and you've played the full 6-player game, like a 7-hour Here I Stand game is pretty quick. If nobody runs rampant and wins really early. I will say in the Irish convention scene, I was the only guy teaching Successors, and we ran multiple tables of Here I Stand at every con.
Fair enough.
Something about the Protestant Reformation has the Irish pretty excited.
To your point, Steve, the fact that the game is fast does a lot for its success, and I'm actually quite surprised that it packs so much narrative arcs in such a short amount of time. And I was curious to have your thoughts, Stuart, on this. Like, how do you feel the game uses its time, especially compared to a game like Here I Stand? I feel like a game like Successors is a bit more efficient at providing you with shifting alliance, new dynamics, new things to do, and exciting gameplay in a very, like, you feel like so many things happen in such a short amount of time. Do you feel like that? Do you feel the same? And how would you compare with other games of big multiplayer games?
I would say so. Successors definitely plays quicker. Like it goes around the table faster. There's more stuff going on. I like that you play a card and you roll the dice and move your generals. It's like a really nice bit where you're always going to be moving your armies in addition to whatever you do with your card. It means that you're doing a lot, but also it doesn't bog itself down because what you're doing tends to be your pool of actions isn't that huge really in a given turn. So it moves very quickly and it's very, I think, easy to read in a way that Here I Stand can be much harder to read. I will say, as someone who's very bad at Successors, that Here I Stand is a much more fun game to lose. It gives you that extra layer of random shit to do, gives you something to do when things are going badly for you, you know? Like when your teeth are being kicked in Successors, you're just having your teeth kicked in. Like, you can't be like, well, I'm going to spend my ops building St. Peter's Basilica, and then I'll at least get a victory point this turn, you know? So it definitely, but they're very different. They are both very similar games, that they're big CDGs, and I think they have a lot of shared elements in that regard. But then they also, like Here I Stand, is very on rails about being the history, and I think really does its best when you basically role play what you're doing and lean into who you are versus you're all just kind of like Successors has great history, but you don't have to role play being Perdiccas. Like you're all just Macedonian generals trying to fucking kill each other.
Yeah. You're Macedonian generals who grew up together and knew each other. So like you're basically the same from the view of 2,300 years on.
But it also doesn't have that thing where you have to, like, if you're the Ottoman player, it's like, well, you can just take a bit of a break because the Pope is busy engaging in a theological debate, and you don't have anything to do for the next 10 minutes. So
there is a lot less downtime, so it makes it a bit more exciting in that regard for sure. But if we want to expand on things that are maybe not that useful, so we talked about the unique powers for the general, and I would argue that the minis are not useful. I think it drives the cost of the game quite a lot, and which is a shame because it's a game that is a very nice addition. I think it would be nice if it was more accessible. And personally, when I see a game like this, I would have liked that the minis were an option, that you could have the base game just with the standees, cardboard standees, and if you want the minis, buy them extra, and that would make it cheaper, make it smaller, make it easier for people to get into it. And then if you want to get the minis, go for it. I say this knowing that most of my games I played with minis, and the reason for that is that in my Wargame club in the UK, there was Dave, and Dave likes to paint minis, and Dave has a full painted set of Successors. And I must say, playing with Dave's set is amazing. Like, it's really cool. But my set, I would never paint those minis. I could throw them away for all I care. Like my box, I don't care about it. I will always play with the cardboard pieces. So I was wondering, what are your thoughts about the minis? And we can start with you, Pierre. I know that for me, it's frustrating that it comes as a default. I think it's a mistake. But then again, they might. I don't say it's a mistake business wise. Hopefully, Phalanx has made a lot of money out of those games. But yeah. But
that's the key, I think. I think it's infinitely more marketable with minis. I think it makes complete sense. I don't like minis. I don't own any games with minis, I think. I really dislike using them, playing with them, because I don't like painting. That's a whole different hobby for me. And I don't want these lumps of grey plastic that I'm playing with to it just takes away from the immersion rather than, or at least from the narrative I'm building, rather than sort of getting me into the narrative I'm building. I think especially in this game where you need them to be quickly identifiable. If the minis are unpainted, you can't identify them. you have to go through this sort of the rough pose that they're doing and try and figure that out, which is just insane. I really don't understand how you can do that. As you said,
It's
we played with
awful.
this.
Yeah.
We played with that same copy, and they're amazingly painted to like reflect the colors on the cards, which is fantastic. That was so fun to play with. But I know that if I got it, I wouldn't do that. And if I tried to do that, it wouldn't be as good. So I would rather just, like you, get one with the little counters. That would make more sense for me.
And they are in the box, to be fair. It's just that I have a huge game with a lot of minis in it
I mean,
that
the
I would
box is
never
huge.
fucking use.
It's heavy
Yeah,
and
the
big,
box is
and
huge.
it's a massive square.
And for me, that's the same. And people are going to cringe when I'm going to say this, but it's the same problem with War of the Rings. You know, War of the Rings, I have this massive box with this shitload of minis that are fucking unidentifiable from one another, and I'm like, just give me fucking cubes. I'm happy with cubes. I have enough imagination in my mind to see the creatures on the board. Just give me the fucking cubes. Like it's impossible. But yeah, what do you think, Philippe? What's your stance on minis?
I agree with what you said. I think minis are here to be painted. If you're not into painting minis, it's better to play with the standees, which are provided in the game, I should mention. So if you want to ditch your minis or resell them to whoever, you can. And the standees are actually much easier to read, actually, and see on the board. No, regarding the minis of Successors specifically, I'm very pissed off because I started painting, and the first set that I painted, I just washed all my Successors minis white to give them like a statue look, and it looks horrific. However, now I'm painting better, but I've already massacred my Successors minis, so I'm playing with standees.
Maybe I can sell you my set. Maybe I can sell you my set of minis that I will not use. Maybe
I'm a buyer.
Yeah, that's what we'll do. Because I won't use them for sure. But yeah, and you, Stuart, any thoughts on minis? I guess that you're probably going to be in line with us.
Wargamer, so I like minis as a concept, and like I prefer like Memoir 44's little plastic dudes to the blocks in Command and Colors and that kind of thing. But as we mentioned in Successors, you're all just random Macedonian dudes, so they all look fucking the same. They're all wearing the same clothes, and it's just pose. And that, I played with standees when I played physically because like I would eventually paint them. I kind of like painting minis. I'm not hugely into it, but I do enjoy it. But I'm never gonna paint it unless I love it. You know, like if I'm painting Successors, I'm committing to a lifestyle where I play Successors regularly. And I don't think I'm ready to commit to that. I certainly wasn't for my first couple games.
You don't know yet.
I think Stuart would rather have you'd rather have Here I Stand minis than just paint them.
I mean, I would be very tempted by Here I Stand minis. If someone wants to give me a set of those.
I would say that I'm committed to play.
Yeah.
I'm committed to play Dave's copy all the time. So that's the thing.
Yes,
so that's my commitment. Yeah, I'm happy to play Dave's copy. And I mean, if it means going to the UK, that's fine. We'll figure it out.
That is the thing, though. It is one of those games where like you don't need a copy. You just need to know someone who has a nice copy.
Yeah.
It's
true.
a big multiplayer game. And you just need to know someone who has that big copy and is prepared to carry that huge box to the local con, which is another thing that's annoying about it being a large box. I don't put games in a car. I got to take the train to the con, man.
You remind me of something that I wanted to talk about, and probably that could be the final discussion on a specific topic about the game, and that's player count. And I was wondering, so my experience, Philippe, has only been playing, I think, 4 and 5 players, and both worked very, very well. I didn't even think about trying 2 or 3, but I was wondering, Philippe, did you have any experience playing with more variable player counts, and what would be your opinions on this?
I never played with 2 players. I played a quick game at 3, but really as a teaching game. But I know quite a few people that play at 3. Apparently, it works quite well. I would say for me, the Goldilocks number is 4 because you have slightly more agency because you play more cards per turn, and the downtime, of course, because there is one less player, is a little bit shorter. So 4 player for me is the best count. It works very well at 5, and I heard it works quite well at 3 as well. But it's a game that scales pretty well, unlike Here I Stand, for example, where you want to have 6 players.
I think it's also one of the big points that I think makes the game attractive is at least the variability 4 to 5 for a big multiplayer game like this is actually pretty appreciable, especially when you see other games that don't have that flexibility. But I didn't expect that 3 players would also work. So now I'm actually quite curious to try it out because I like 3-player games a lot. I think it's a very specific kind of dynamic. I like the chaos of Successors 5 players, but I think 3 players could be a bit more tight. I don't know. I think that could be an interesting experience. I would be curious to try out at least. And you, Pierre and Stuart, did you had any experience with other player counts, or you played 4 or 5?
I just played 4 or 5. I really liked it at those play counts. I think that was really fun. It was really effective, and I did feel like it was that right balance of downtime and openness, and being able to spend time with your turn without it taking too long. I thought it was good still, but I would be interested to play 3. I think it'd be a totally different game though, which is fine, like totally fine. But I think it would feel very different.
I only played 4 or 5. I think it's interesting just to say, even like I can't think of that many war games that have variable player counts that they're good at. When you think about it, like that are built to play a range. I mean, games like Here I Stand claim they do, but Here I Stand is a 6-player game. If you're playing with any other number, you're playing it wrong. And things like it tends to be a hobby that has quite fixed player counts. I think of, or they'll be like, there's a 2-player version and a 4-player version, which is just the 2-player version, but we split the sides. And it's quite, but like Successors is quite dynamic in that way. It's much more reminiscent of something you would find on the Eurogame side of the market, where a lot of those games do feel very different at different player counts, and the kind of pressure that is applied by the different numbers makes them feel very different. I think Successors captures a lot of that in a way that I can't think of really any other wargame I've played that's quite nailed that.
So for me, I would compare it to not necessarily war games, but in the historical game category to the PAX series. For me, it feels the same in the sense that it works at different player counts, but it feels radically different at different player counts. And you always have that goal number, and it goes from chess to complete chaos, and you have something in the middle that works really well. And for me, I would probably compare it to this. But for me, it's still as a war game of that type, a CDG with activation of your generals like Hannibal or stuff like this. The fact that it's random setup and works at multiple player count is completely amazing. I don't know how they did it. Like it's fascinating. And as you said, Stuart, I cannot think of any game that still feels historical and works this way. I don't know how they managed to do something like this. It's quite a feat. I don't know. So short reviews for each of us with your own rating system that you can come up with. I don't care. Stuart uses crossbows. Pierre, I don't know, mushrooms. I'm not. And Philippe, you can come up with whatever you want. It can be snails. I don't care. Just a quick review, a recap of what you think of the game, strength, weaknesses, what place does it have for you in your gaming collection or for you as a gamer, and a random rating that doesn't mean anything. And we can start with you, Pierre.
Sure. I really like it. I think it's not going to be a game we're going to buy because the box is so huge. I'm really keen to play it again, and I think it will be quite like maybe a convention game for me. A game that I'd like to jump in on, but I'm happy playing once a year maybe. I like the set after the second game I played of it. I liked how it did really feel like it was evoking the history of the time, even though I wasn't playing through the events of the history. It felt quite good. I'd give, do I have to use mushrooms? I'd give it like 4 mushrooms out of 5. I would recommend a couple of books. The Greek World After Alexander, 323 to 30 BC by Graham Shipley is a good sort of broad overview. It's fine. I used it at university quite a lot. And if you have access to it, I would get it to maybe read a few chapters of it. But if you want something a bit more specific that's been released a bit more recently and is a bit more accessible, is Edward Anson's Alexander's Heirs, The Age of Successors I think that one's pretty good and pretty accessible, and most libraries have it, weirdly. So for like it's a relatively dense history book that's quite accessible. So do jump in on that one if you can. But yeah, that's what I think of.
Okay. Do you think it's a smooth brain friendly? So I could read it basically. That's what you're saying.
You could read it. Yeah, everyone else could definitely in this call. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good to know. Great. Stuart, what's your short review?
I think it's a really impressive design. I have enjoyed playing it, and I am very impressed with like how it marries all its elements and the kind of things we talked about, the diversity of player things. But I also think for me, it's a little bit too nasty. Like it's quite I describe it as being a sharp design because it's very well made, it's very well crafted, but you can cut yourself on it really easily, and you can find and I'm bad at it, which means I get cut a lot. So I find that part of it quite challenging. And it's not that kind of game that I prefer to play. I would still definitely be interested in playing it periodically. Like it is such an interesting game, but I'm less inclined to say I'm less inclined to be the person who owns it and convinces other people to play it. And I'm more likely to want to be the kind of person that every couple of years at a convention I'll sit down and lose a game of Successors. But I am a devoted Here I Stand fanboy, so that is my big CDG con game of choice. And I would give Successors 3 out of 5 proto crossbows.
Good. Philippe, what's your short review?
So it's one of the multiplayer CDG game that I play the most. I played more than a dozen games over the last 3 years. I would say 3 to 4 years. I really, really, really like Successors, but that's also because it's a game that works for me. It's, as Stuart, you said, it's a nasty game. It's the meanest of all the games I know. It's very mean. You need to be mean to win. Something we didn't evoke earlier on is that to win, you need to be hidden in the shadows, just a few VPs away from victory, and then all of a sudden spring to victory. If you fail that move,
you're screwed.
Usually it's very bad for
Yeah.
you. And I really, really, really like that narrative that you build for yourself as one player. Like you create a strategy and the tension of when you want to make your push for victory is very, very high, and that's something that I like very, very much. But yes, it's a very mean game. It really rewards manipulation of other players, making them believe that you are going to do X, whereas your objective is Y. So it's not for everyone. You need to play with thick-skinned players, otherwise you can lose a few friends. That's for sure. Other than that, the game plays quite fast. It's easy actually to organize a session because many people have the game or have played the game. So me personally, I don't play it only at conventions. I also play it quite regularly at home with friends. So yeah, that's if my only recommendation is if you haven't tried Successors yet, you should give it a go to decide whether it's for you or not. And as for my rating, I believe on BGG I rated it 9 out of 10.
I won't say much more because I feel like all of you said everything. I agree with Philippe that it's not only a convention game. It's just great to play at a convention because it's one of those big games, but it's quite easy to wrap up in the morning or in an afternoon. So it's a nice change of pace by still having this convention experience. But you can definitely play it at home in one sitting, which is quite great. I love its meanness personally. I love that it has sharp edges and it can be a bit painful. Personally, it's also more to my taste, and I feel like in that regard, it also reminds me of the pack series where, like, you can, especially at low player count, a mistake can be like deadly straight away. And I kind of like this. And I say this as someone who enjoys losing. And you know, when Philippe won at the game in PunchCon, it actually made me want to play it again as soon as I could, because when I saw how Philippe won, I was like, oh, that was really smart. He set himself up, and then he went for this. He created that fleet, and then he got that, and then he was there all along. He was just waiting for the right time, and I was like, that was.
I was
so
very
cool.
sneaky.
That was so
You're
cool.
putting you're describing it in a very nice way, but it was a very sneaky win.
But no, but it was great.
As it should be.
Great
As
to
it
see.
should be.
Yeah. And it made me happy. Like when I saw you win, I was like, "Oh, that's a cool move," and I was like, "That's really cool." And yeah, personally, it's the kind of thing that I like, and I think I would also rate it a 4.5 out of 5. And I think it's a classic for a reason. I just wish the game had a cheaper option to get access to it and a smaller option to get access to it. But I think that Phalanx did an amazing job on the artwork and the production. I think we need to give them credit for that. I respect their decision of making a rulebook that is probably more accessible to non-war gamers. I'm not sure that it is really useful, because I'm not sure that, and I might be totally wrong, that non-war gamers are going to be interested in this game. But that being said, I think it's a really interesting approach. Maybe having 2 rule books would have been a nicer way to do it, like GMT is starting to do, like an actual more learn to play, more classical style of rule book that you would find in general board games, and then a classic numbered with reference and everything. But that being said, I think they did an amazing job. I even have the metal ring that you can wear, like if you're the how is it called in the game? When you're the one that everyone can fight.
The usurper.
Yeah, the usurper. Yeah. Which I think is, there is a lot of great small bits. I think they did a great job. But yeah, I think it's a great game. I think you need to play it. You don't need to buy it, because if you have wargamers around you, as was said before, someone will have a copy. I would hate to have to teach the game to anyone. That's the thing. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. And Stuart, I'm actually amazed that you did it twice. Like, for me, even thinking about doing it once makes me tired. But if you can play with other people that know the game, not necessarily experts, but yeah.
I taught
you taught us Tanto Manta. Yeah, I know. You taught Tanto Manta. You're ready for anything, but still. But let's not reopen that can of worm, and let's end on a positive note. Successors is amazing. You need to try it. If you enjoy it, get a copy. As Philippe said, 3rd or 4th edition is fine. Personally, I think the 4th edition is amazing. It's just that I don't think those minis are useful. But if you have the money, just go for it. And if you can paint them, it's just great. It's a great experience. Thanks a lot for taking the time to the 3 of you. Really appreciate it. It was great playing with you, Philippe. You were really proactive in pushing this forward, so that was really nice. Thanks a lot for
my pleasure
for that. And I'm not sure what would be the next Club de Jeux collective review that we're going to record. But if you want to know,
it might be Plantagenet, but we don't know.
Okay.
It might be Plantagenet. There might be a few.
Yeah, but if you want to know for sure, follow me on Twitter at Fred Serval, and I will post updates there, and you will know what's happening and everything. And if you want to know even earlier, you know what you can do? You can donate on Ko-fi and support the show and join the server and actually take part in the Club de Jeux and be here on the podcast to talk about the game that you learned with us. So that's the idea. But anyway, thanks everyone. Have a great evening, morning. I don't know when you're listening to this. I don't know if I've edited this, ever. Like that's the thing. I'm at this point in time where we've recorded, but will it ever be released? Who knows? And see you soon.